I'll tell you guys what. This Prince Andrew news is kind of wild, is it not? Landon Moore and I were having a conversation. I don't know if you heard that CBS News report where they said he wasn't even a real prince. I feel like that's the meanest thing you can say to somebody in royalty. Must be nice to be English, where they hold their powerful to account when they're clearly implicated in some kind of massive pedophile ring involving the world's just most rich and powerful. That must be nice. I wish. I think I'm getting pushed to the point where I might start reading you guys some of my angrier emails because the number of people who are like, if you don't stop pushing it with Donald Trump and getting mentioned 38,000 times in the Epstein list, we might just go for Bill Clinton or Joe Biden. Oh no. First of all, Joe Biden, I don't even think is in the list. More importantly, um, what show have you been listening to where you think I'm ride or die with any politician ever? Like, I've said it a billion times over at this point. I'm a pretty staunch leftist. What it means to be leftist is obviously what MAGA's doing doesn't make any sense, but it's not like I'm ride or die Democratic Party. I feel like I've made my feelings about geriatric white dudes in politics pretty well known at this point. Um, if it turns out they did something good, go get them. I'm just saying any person you guys throw at me hasn't been mentioned as many times as Donald Trump has been. Like, cry about it. I don't know what you want me to say. It's a very interesting conversation. Very interesting to see what's going to happen to Prince Andrew here as it moves forward. I have no idea what to expect, but at the very least, at least there's accountability. We're seeing that in a number of different places. Not so much in the economic sphere yet. You're watching jobs get lost, but I feel like that's probably not far enough given what the accusations kind of include there. But only time will tell where that's ultimately going to end. I don't want to start off with Epstein, but just given the severity of this Prince Andrew thing, I at least wanted to mention it here right off the top of the show. But we will get into it more in the 10 o'clock hour. I want to focus this 9 o'clock hour more on data centers, antitrust, money in politics, things like that. And we're going to kind of tie this all together. If you missed the 8:30 local hour, we do have a guest coming on at 9:30. Max M. Miller, he's a podcast host with the Fair Fight podcast. He's an attorney, self-described outspoken prairie populist. As a populist in the Midwest myself, I have a feeling Max and I are going to have a lot in common. We're going to be talking specifically about eminent domain and the government's ability to essentially take our land and property in the name of building so many of these data centers, which, if you're new to the program, seems pretty obvious that a large majority of the American population do not want. If you haven't seen the video going viral yet, there was a man in Oklahoma who ended up getting arrested at a speaking forum for speaking too long in opposition to a data center being built in their region, because whether you are Republican, Democrat, or independent, in a world where it seems like we cannot agree on anything, the one thing we can agree on is we need to learn a lot more about this data center stuff before we continue on. I actually have a clip that I'd like to play for you now from the podcast that Max hosts. And for the record, he actually hosts that podcast with Alvaro Bedoya, who is was the FTC commissioner under Joe Biden, just beneath Lena Khan. And if you know me at all, you know that I think that Lena and Alvaro were two of the best parts of the Biden administration, possibly the only good parts of the Biden administration. So it's a type of podcast that I can absolutely get behind. And I would like to play for you guys just a brief snippet of the kind of way that they talk to give you an idea of what you're going to be getting into at 9:30, because I hadn't heard of this podcast before introducing myself to Max, but I got to say, I like what I hear. And nobody really wants a data center in their... That's the wrong audio. Bush League. Here we go. Listen to this.
You had Vice President Harris say when some of this stuff started happening, I was really disappointed in the titans of industry, right? And then you had former President Barack Obama say, these billionaires really need to step up, or these CEOs, corporate America really needs to step up. And this party needs to stop taking their cues from the billionaire class, needs to stop thinking that the billionaire class
I've heard this before.
A moral compass on any of these issues, and start listening.
You don't become a billionaire by having morality.
Exactly. How do you become a billionaire?
Well, it's like this idea, and this is where we've got a cultural problem in America, because we hold up on a pedestal people who essentially exhibit all of the qualities of a greedy, bad person. I've told you before, I'm getting a little more spiritual as I get older and kind of thinking about morality and thinking about, what is right and wrong. And I love the Bible passage that says it is easier for a camel to fit through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. And I think that the Bible was telling us something there, which is do not trust. Do not hold up on a pedestal anyone who has accumulated wealth. Because that essentially means that they have eschewed any responsibility for other people. That they have eschewed any responsibility to make things better for other people. And you said something that I want to contradict, because you said it's like they're not coming to help us. But I think we need to realize that these companies that supported the One Big Beautiful Bill, that these companies who profit off of the dragnet state, the surveillance economy that we now have, it's not just that they're not coming to help us. They're actively working against us. They are actively working to undermine the freedom of the United States so that they can get a tax cut, so that they can make a little more money. And to me, that makes them the enemy.
The beauty of that clip to me is that it starts off highlighting the shortcomings of the Democratic Party, with Kamala Harris and Barack Obama depending on billionaires, shifting over to Donald Trump cutting taxes for those billionaires, and then highlighting something that I love this term, the surveillance economy, something that we've been talking about regularly. If you missed the end of last show, Anthropic was working with the Defense Department, and they essentially, because they refused to create software that the government would use to spy on Americans en masse, or would create weapons that would be fired without human involvement, they essentially have been designated, I'm paraphrasing here, but any company that wants to do business with the Defense Department of America cannot be involved with Anthropic now, because they refused to play ball in that way. That should probably cause a bit of concern for each and every single one of us. So that conversation is going to be at 9:30, talking about eminent domain, but I want to spend the next 10 minutes kind of setting up why I want to talk about this with you guys. And it starts right here in our state, Wisconsin. And during the setup, I kind of laid it out there. We have an incredibly close proximity to fresh water sources, with the Great Lakes so close. We've got the farmland. We have a purple state. We have the history with Foxconn, which I was not here for that, but I think enough of you guys remember how that went, and the idea that we're willing to help these major companies invest in our state with the promise that I put in quotes of creating jobs, which, if you've been listening to this show long enough, these things don't create jobs. I actually have the Microsoft lawyer audio queued up for when Max is on the program. But so ABC News is reporting on this, and I highly recommend everybody give the entire article a look. Tom Utek, he's lived on a 52-acre property in Saukville, Wisconsin. That's the northern part of the state for people not listening in Wisconsin, for just about 40 years. He moved there the year after I was born. It's a long time. I've done a lot with this life. He received a letter in the mail from his utility company informing him that a massive power line will be built through his property. The article says it's undoing years of work and stripping away the muse for his art. He had been planting trees that had been growing since 1988. He's 83 years old now, and this is just one example, by the way. UTEC later learned that the transmission line would be used to help power a massive $15 billion data center campus that's set to be built over 500 football fields worth of farmland in Port Washington, a signature part of the Trump administration's $500 billion Stargate partnership with OpenAI and Oracle, which Donald Trump hopes will help supercharge the artificial intelligence revolution. UTEC is facing what other residents in his town are facing more and more, and this is happening all over the country as well. the risk of losing parts of his land to eminent domain, the government's legal authority to seize private property for public use, in support of the growing expansion of AI data centers as the demand to power them continues to grow. Currently, America has 3,000 data centers. Another 1,200 are currently under construction as we speak right now. The Trump administration has pushed to rapidly build and deploy AI with urgency, arguing it will be vital to stay ahead of rivals like China and protect national security. Now, it's important that I highlight at this point that China right now, when you add up all of their different AI agents, currently are in control of 47% of the market share worldwide. And I think this is growing concerning to a lot of people high up in politics because we have invested so much more. We are crushing China in terms of dollars investment into trying to get this operation off the ground. And this will be a conversation I have with Max, because if we don't invest in it, clearly other countries are going to. Is this surveillance state that we are spiraling towards inevitable at this point? I never look at life through a defeatist attitude, and I do get concerned about how quickly we're seeing these things get built, how quickly we're seeing AI develop, and the fact that so much of our Congress is 70, 80, 90 years old and not necessarily passing the kind of regulations and laws that are going to be needed to prevent us from being exploited from these companies. It seems inevitable in a lot of ways unless we use our voices. Trump said, I'm going to help a lot through emergency declarations because we have an emergency. We have to get this stuff built. So they have to produce a lot of electricity, and we'll make it possible for them to get this production done easily at their own plant if they want. Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and this should highlight one of the biggest flaws within America. Our energy bills have been skyrocketing. I did the math with you guys on Monday. Since 2000, between 2000 and 2020, our electricity rates went up about 60%. From 2020 till today, they went up an additional 45% from there. They are shooting through the roof. Turns out you can declare an emergency and have all these energy companies built, but it's not going to be in the name of generating more energy to bring our rates down. It's going to be to build these data centers that are ultimately, in my opinion, going to become our digital prisons. Moving on. It's exciting because, this is Mayor Ted Netsky of Port Washington. It's exciting because it's going to transform our community. It's going to create a tax base and jobs and secondary and tertiary workforce and opportunities that we have not envisioned, and it's going to lead us into a real renaissance. Now, I have already highlighted that the overwhelming majority of the jobs that are going to come out of data centers come from the actual building of the data centers. Once they are built, you're pretty hard-pressed to find any evidence that it's going to lead to any kind of renaissance. Nationwide, electricity prices have jumped 6.9% just in 2025. That's more than double the inflation rate of that year at 2.9%, according to new analysis by Goldman Sachs economists who say they expect data centers to boost electricity demand significantly, accounting for about 40% of total power demand growth over the next 5 years. Now, something tells me, and I'm speaking to my MAGA listeners now, that if Kamala Harris were using eminent domain to build a giant data center in the name of being able to compile information about American citizens, that probably wouldn't be sitting too well with you guys right now. Instead of waiting for a Democrat to be in power for you guys to realize that this sucks, I'd prefer we all just got to that point right now so that we can band together and start trying to prevent this stuff from happening before it gets out of hand, or at the very least until we see that our Congress people are taking it seriously in a way. But it looks like they're not interested in waiting like that. It looks to me like they are much more interested in using their powers of eminent domain in order to maximize profits. Now, that's where this conversation is going to need to have an expert, and that's where Max M. Miller comes in, talking about what legal right the government has to declare eminent domain in the name of trying to capitalize on people's farmland that do not want to sell. It's an unfortunate reality a lot of people are facing. It's an unfortunate reality that that Tom Utek is facing. And again, these power lines that are going up, these The structures that are being built are said to be taller than the Statue of Liberty. These aren't small things. These are going right in the middle of his property, running through it. And this is just as likely to happen to anybody listening to me right now as it is to Tom. I see we have a couple of comments coming on through here. Justin says, pretty sure data center construction with eminent domain is going to lead to Bundy-style standoff. And the text goes on from there. I'll keep that half to myself, Justin, but I feel you. I feel where you're coming from there. And KG says in response to the Prince Andrew thing, we can't hold people in the Epstein files accountable. It could collapse the whole system. You're threatening us with a good time. Some kudos to the UK for finally acting. Better late than never. Feel that's coming out of Houston. I feel where you guys are coming from with both of those statements. I will get back to Epstein, I promise, KG. But, Justin, I don't think you're wrong. And the best part is, and I don't mean to say best because it is very frustrating, but we watched an arrest take place in Oklahoma. It was in a deep red area in Oklahoma. Not a whole lot of liberals to be seen in that particular town hall, and people were furious. I can't play the audio for you because it was too hard to censor. Without kind of losing the context of what was happening, because people are furious while they're watching one of their fellow citizens get arrested. He did go over his time, but I'm willing to bet, I don't have proof, but I'm willing to bet there were a lot of people going over their time in favor of data centers that weren't too concerned about getting arrested for going over. But this individual went over, and you see him getting cuffed and taken away for speaking out against what was being built. So with that, as I've been mentioning, we'll be taking text questions as well. I haven't ran that past Max yet, but I'm sure he'll be down for it. So 920-281-1150, 920-281-1150. We'll try and get a couple of questions in while he and I are chatting. We're going to be talking about how valid these eminent domain claims are. Are they going to be able to declare a national emergency? I want to talk about super PACs investing $65 million into the midterms this year, exclusively into pro-AI candidates. Doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. Doesn't matter if you're in favor of Israel or Palestine. It doesn't matter if you're in favor of ICE or you think they're the Gestapo. As long as you're willing to allow these data centers to get built, regardless of what your constituents say, Meta is ready to pump money into your pockets. We've got a 50% increase in electric bills, as I've talked about. I want to talk to him about the surveillance economy in general. There's so many conversations to be had surrounding the development of this technology. We're going to be doing that on the other side of the break with, again, Max M. Miller, attorney and advocate for reining in corporate power, podcast host of the Fair Fight podcast with Alvaro Bedoya. That is coming up on the other side of the break. So stay tuned, everybody. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY and the Political Voices Network. All right, guys, we are back to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos right here on WHBY. I've talked about it long enough. Now we are here with the individual. This is Max M. Miller. You can catch him on the podcast, the Fair Fight podcast with Alvaro Bedoya. That is the former FTC commissioner under Joe Biden. He is an attorney, an advocate for reining in corporate power, and an outspoken prairie populist. Sounds like my kind of guy. Without further ado, Max, thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Can you hear me? Am I
absolutely can. That's perfect. Yeah.
Thank you.
I appreciate you. I just so the listeners at home and watching on YouTube and listening later in the day know, I'm reaching out to you at like 5 o'clock in the morning. I saw a post of yours on Twitter. I'm like, oh, this guy's great. I need to get him on the show. And you responded immediately. So I appreciate that very much. And I've been looking forward to this conversation all morning.
No, it was a pleasure to wake up this morning and have that message from you, because I love talking about corporate power and its problems. I think you and I are similar. We both, it's silly for us to focus on left versus right all the time when the real fight is against the top.
Yeah, I absolutely love the sentiment, and it's kind of what this show's all about. So I'd love to jump into it. And by the way, we already have somebody waiting on hold. You and I are going to do this for a little bit, but people are interested in this conversation.
Great.
So looking forward to that there. But let's just start with the main reason I brought you on here. I mean, there is an ABC article that I kind of went through with the listeners for the first 15 minutes of the show here. The post that I found you on is kind of warning people like, hey, you might start to see eminent domain get used in the name of building these data centers, building the energy necessary in order to get, or the energy supply to be able to get these data centers off the ground. And you had a pretty interesting comment surrounding that, essentially saying that there are certain rules that apply to this that need to be followed. So I'll kind of leave the floor to you there to explain, is this as doable as people think it is, or what's going to get in the way of that?
So the immediate issue involving eminent domain use for public utilities is a much more complicated question than we typically have. I was talking specifically about the Kelo case, which was a 2005 Supreme Court case, which most attorneys, I think, would say that the Supreme Court got wrong. That it's kind of despised, because essentially what it allowed a town to do was to take private property, to take homes that people have been living in for, sometimes generations, like their property, and take it for the benefit of a private corporation. In the case of Kelo, it was for Pfizer Corporation, that Pfizer wanted to have a new corporate campus, and it was going to include mixed use, have some shopping in it. And the city of New London was like, okay, great. Well, we're just going to, declare that this is for a public use in our determination and take the private land. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States, I think, surprised a lot of people and actually blessed that and said, yeah, basically we're going to defer. And this goes back to a long series of cases in the United States where the courts defer to like legislative judgment. Basically, like if the people through their representatives get together and say that this is for a good public use, then we're going to allow the public use part of the takings clause is what it's called. We're going to allow that to be used for that private benefit. But the facts of Kelo made it so apparent that it was a transfer from many to just one corporation, in this case Pfizer, that's why there was such a vehement, angry reaction to the Kelo case. And we've been feeling the effects of that ever since, where there's more and more a corporate encroachment on our private property rights.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong with that assessment. And obviously Pfizer rubs people wrong for a number of different ways when you hear about the things that they're doing there. We can probably save that for another conversation. Is there any validity to the claim? I read a quote from President Trump himself. I'm going to help a lot through emergency declaration because we have an emergency. We have to get this stuff built. Could that kind of provide the obfuscation necessary to kind of make this seem like a defense measure? Otherwise, China is going to blah, 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 blah. Is there some validity to that? Do you fear that might be a useful strategy?
Here's my concern with that, because that is essentially, when we talk about the takings clause of the Constitution, it's under the Fifth Amendment, that essentially private property cannot be taken by the government unless it is for a public use and just compensation is given. The determination of public use, the courts have typically found that needs to come from a legislative body, right? So I think it's a different situation. The Kelo, just so everybody knows, it's based upon a decision called Midkiff. It was the Hawaii Housing Authority v. Midkiff. That was a much earlier decision. I think it was around 1984. In that case, the legislature decided that because land ownership in Hawaii was so concentrated, right? This almost sounds an antitrust. The idea that all of the real estate of Hawaii belonged to very few people, that they were going to transfer that property to the many. So basically take from the concentrated wealth and power and disperse it to the many. And what Kelo does is it turns that on its head, because it takes takes property from the many and transfers it to the few. So going to your question about whether or not there's validity to us like being in an AI race against China, I mean, yeah, there's validity to the idea that the United States is in an AI race against China. But what are we willing to give up in pursuit of that race? Are we willing to give up our private property rights in order to beat China? The funny thing is that China has been able to accomplish its AI competition, right? It's competing with the United States through very different means than the United States. They've spent so much less money on it. Yep. They've allowed it to develop organically from the people. right? In many ways, it's more akin to what the United States was supposed to be, right? Like dispersed power, many people participating in it. What the United States has done with its concentration of capital, and basically the concentration of corporate power, is we are spending phenomenal amounts of money for private ownership of AI technology.
Yeah, that it seems like a pretty appropriate decision. The number that I came across in preparation for this segment is 47% of the entire market concentration is currently controlled by China right now, despite spending so much less than what we've been pumping into it here because of exactly what you're talking about. Not saying China's flawless, but they really have taken a lot of their investment and pumped it into developing things for society as opposed to consolidating the capital, which is a problem.
And I'll just note something, because for people who don't know my background necessarily, but I'm an antitrust attorney by trade. I worked for the Federal Trade Commission. I advised Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya on competition policy. Before that, I was an antitrust enforcer for the state of Iowa. And one of the things that I did in my past was I sued Google for antitrust violations when I was with the state of Iowa. We had a multi-state action against Google. And in that, I learned a lot about the Chinese technology market. And even though China is a communist country, right, in many ways, its markets function more like what Adam Smith envisioned capitalism to be than American markets. Because what we have done in America is kind of concentrate wealth and power to a point that it no longer starts to look like capitalism, but it looks more like corporatism. And so I wouldn't want to live under, the Chinese economy and the control that the Chinese government has over its people. But I also don't want to live under an American government where power is concentrated into a few hands, and we all should just act like we're thankful for that power being exercised over us.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't know we were going to go here, but I love that we are. I talk about this quite a bit. I am by no means an expert on the matter, but the rules in order to prevent a lot of this consolidation are already on the books. It's just a matter of enforcement more so than it is actually generating new laws to prevent this from happening, correct?
Yeah. So in a little bit of the history of antitrust in the United States, the antitrust law came from farmers. You're in Wisconsin, I'm in Iowa. I call myself a prairie populist because, I come from an agricultural background. Like my grandfather was a farmer, and I believe so strongly. I mean, this is Thomas Jefferson's ideal of America, is that everybody owns a bit of land, right? They can farm it, they can develop it, they can produce on it, and then they have a stake in their democracy. So it was farmers in the Midwest who got together to basically lobby state legislatures. So Iowa was the first legislature in the country to have a general antitrust law. It was an act to prohibit the pools, trusts, and conspiracies. It was an 1888 law. And then 2 years later, in 1890, the federal government passed the Sherman Act. I'm sure you've heard of that. Yes. But surprisingly, the Sherman Act didn't go far enough. Like, people were upset that it wasn't able to break up the monopolies of that time, the different trusts that there were. There was the beef trust, the sugar trust, the railroads had immense amount of power over everybody. So then in the progressive era of the United States, between like 1910 and 1920, Congress started passing additional laws. And these are laws that are still on the book that can be used. The FTC Act was one. That prohibits something that's called unfair methods of competition. It's much broader than the antitrust laws. We passed the Packers and Stockyard Act. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are farmers. Maybe they're involved in the beef markets of this country. There is a law on the books that prevents the Packers from exercising the power that they have over beef producers, and it basically goes unenforced.
Yeah, that it seems like, and that's a development. I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but at least since the 80s, I know that we had rules that were enacted, and then we kind of slowly have been rolling them back here. I'll tell you what, we have
you had. Let me just explain the 1980s there. In the 1970s, you started to have economists exercise a lot of power over public policy in the United States. And so these economists put forward this idea that we should ignore the democratic law. We should ignore what the people said the law should be, because they just don't understand economics, right? But we economists understand how markets work. And so we're going to change the law through the courts so that instead of us doing what is written on the page, we're going to make an economic determination of whether or not we should be concerned about the power exercised by corporations. And that happened through the 80s, 90s, 2000. It wasn't until the Biden administration where, I worked under Lena Khan. I worked under Alvaro Bedoya, but worked very closely with Lena Khan's office. We were trying to bring back the original democratic intent of the antitrust laws.
Yeah, I I would oftentimes state what that office was trying to do, which had its faults, the Biden administration, that is, but
It had faults.
It was trying to undo 40 years of inactivity in 4 years, and I think it was a hell of a job that had been done given the monumental tasks that was ahead of them. But obviously, we would need that to be followed up on, and it seems like as we learn more about what's going to happen with Ticketmaster, we're watching these media companies kind of give favors in exchange for consolidation. It looks like we're back to the old boss, same as the new boss kind of approach here until further notice. If you don't mind, we're speaking with Max Miller here. We have Cindy, who's been waiting for a while, and we actually received a second caller as well. We'll do that in a moment. But Cindy, you're live on the air with Max and myself on Outside the Box. What are your thoughts?
Well, about this AI center and the data collection, I was at an EA event a couple of months ago, and I ran into a young couple in their late 30s, both here on visas, from China. They lived in Beijing. Now, this was 10 years ago they left. So you can imagine how things have changed in the 10 years. But they told me that back in Beijing, everything was so heavily regulated, spied on, that they didn't even have to have police officers on the streets like we do here, because if you run a traffic light, they send a cop over to your house. He gives you a ticket. If you do something more egregious, they send an FBI, whatever their police force is, over to your house and arrest you, because they know what you're doing every second of the day, no matter where you are. And I say, be careful what we wish for if we think we want to compete with China.
Thank you for the call there, Cindy. And I think that kind of ties in, Max, to the surveillance economy that you were kind of referencing there. So when you talk about a surveillance economy, is that essentially when you say you don't want to live under the authoritative rule of China, kind of to that extent?
So when John Sherman was pushing for the Sherman Act to be passed, the original antitrust law at the federal level, I'm going to paraphrase here, but he said, we would never suffer a king in our government. So why would we suffer a king in our markets? Right. And so I think when we talk about that evil, and I'll call it evil, right? It is evil for a government to have that kind of surveillance over its people. Like, we should not ever accept that from a government, that they can basically track us every moment of every day and punish us, because of their surveillance. One of my favorite films is a film called The Lives of Others, which is all about the Stasi in East Germany, and it's like surveillance tactics. Really, really great film. But so I don't want anybody to think that I would want to have what the Chinese have. But in America, we're essentially doing the same thing. We're just turning it over to unaccountable private interests, right? Yeah. And when those unaccountable private interests also work with our government, right? When you have like Palantir, which I know you've talked about on this show before, which we should all be very skeptical about the power that Palantir, especially if anybody ever watches Alex Karp, who is the CEO of Palantir, talk, it should make you very scared that somebody like that has that kind of power over you. But I want to be clear that the surveillance, so in that clip that you played of me earlier, I was talking, when I said the surveillance economy, I was kind of conflating two ideas. The surveillance economy can apply to like market transactions. So like you go to the store and how you do it. I was talking more about the business of surveillance, because there are so many companies that are making numbers or making profits off of partnering with the government to surveil us. So that part of the surveillance economy, I'm going to set aside, because I think we should be equally concerned about corporations monitoring us, so that they can extract the highest price out of us out of the market.
For sure. And Jerry simply says Minority Report. You might not know this about me, Max. I'm a big movie buff. I wrote down The Lives of Others. I will be checking this out. I've never seen that one, and it's definitely piqued my interest. We don't have to go to break here. I told you 15 minutes. We're going to smash past that if that's okay. And
Please.
we're gonna, yeah, we have another caller. I don't even know who it is. I don't have a call screener. We're just going to kind of go. Hello, you're on Outside the Box with Max Miller and myself.
Hey, good morning, Ben and Max.
Carlos, how are you, man? What's on your mind?
Yeah. So you got my wheels turning. Really good discussion. One thing I would suggest with China, and you kind of alluded to it, the amount of power and control the government has over how things go, far less autonomy in private industry. And it's messy, of course, between, our rights and our individualism versus their collectivism and how that goes. But I would suggest they can get that done so much cheaper, meaning the AI race, because they're not encumbered with our messy tugging pull on individual rights versus what is in the best public interest. The part that scares me is what the last caller talked about. Is that coming for us? Are we going to be looking in a society that's going to be like that? And even more scary, which I'm not carrying the water of the Republicans or anybody, how would that look if China beat us in the AI race and then the chessboard is set, regardless of what kind of prowess we maintain? What if they have things so advanced that we're neutralized? We can't do anything, and they basically own us. Now, I serve the country. I'm willing to die for this place. Over my dead body, I want that. So I don't have any epiphany as to the way forward, but to me, it is a very difficult decision or question to answer. Where do we draw the line? And do we give something up now so we can ensure we win this race and we don't have our way of life compromised on an aggregate level versus really standing on our individual rights and fighting every battle, which is costly, which Max knows better than any of us. He's a lawyer. That stuff isn't cheap. You guys are expensive. So as we flush that out, where do we draw that line?
Hey, I appreciate the call, Carlos. Max, your thoughts on anything he just mentioned there?
I agree with that caller, and we're probably on different sides of the political ball, or I don't want to assume I know where he is, but I agree. I do not want the government to have that kind of surveillance power over us, and I certainly don't want China to run the United States, right? I don't want China to take. And I do understand the point that he's making. He's like, well, what about if the AI in China is so good that it eventually puts us asunder, right? That it takes over the United States. And yeah, and I'm like you, sir, I am willing to die for this country too. But I want to remind one of our founding fathers, Ben Franklin, said something beautiful that has always stayed with me. And I remember talking about this back in the early 2000s when the Patriot Act was going on. Those that would give up essential liberty to gain temporary security deserve neither. And I think we should think about that, right? When we allow ourselves to be so scared about security that we give up our rights, that we give up our liberty, it's just as easy that our government could turn into an authoritarian government like China as it is for China to take over the United States. And so I think first and foremost, we have to think about our own government, our own power structures in the United States, and really fight for the right power structures. And then we focus on the external threats.
Yeah, and I'd even argue, it feels like you and I are from a similar era. What you're describing is essentially what people warned about after the passage of the Patriot Act 20 years ago, and here we are knowing full well that our stuff's getting spied on. I'll tell you what, we are running close to the end of the hour here, but I do want to ask, because I always take guff because this show's very heavy, and I very rarely provide any of the sunshine on the other side of it to be like, well, here's something that we can do. I kind of alluded to the fact Meta is dropping $65 million into super PACs willing to push any candidate, Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter where you stand on any issue as long as you are pro AI. What do the people that are voting need to know that this is high on their priority list right now in terms of eminent domain is a federal level deal, right? what can the local officials, what can the state officials, what can we do in terms of exercising our voting power, in terms of protesting? How can we kind of push back against this until these antitrust laws and until these regulations are enforced?
I think every voter should be looking at the money. Look at the money that is flowing into candidates, right? The reason that Meta is willing to invest 65 million is because they know that the return on their investment is going to be much greater. So basically we have to decide, are we on the side of the people and the masses, or are we on the side of corporations? Because corporations have interests that often run counter to what the people want. And so if the money is flowing into a particular candidate from a company like Meta, and you don't like what Meta has done, you don't like how eminent domain is being used to benefit a company like Meta, then I think you need to find a different candidate in that race and vote for them. And that goes Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever you are. We should be voting for candidates who represent the people's interests and not corporate interests.
That is Max M. Miller. You can catch him on the Fair Fight podcast. I watched a little bit of it, absolutely loved what I saw. He's an attorney, advocate for reigning in corporate power, and as he said, outspoken prairie populist. Max, I absolutely love this conversation. I hope you come back again, because
please have me on again.
Insight. Yeah, wonderful. So thank you for being here, and you have a great rest of your day, all right?
Hey, thanks for having me, Ben.
Of course. All right, guys, that does it for that conversation. Quick break, and we'll put a bow on this hour. Stay right where you are, Outside the Box with Ben Cominos, here on WHBY and the Political Voices Network. All right, we're back. Ben Cominos, Outside the Box, WHBY, Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company Appleton, Wisconsin depends on. If you're just joining us, you missed an awesome conversation with Max Miller. He is an antitrust attorney as well as a podcast host with Alvaro Bedoya, who was Joe Biden's FTC commissioner. It's called the Fair Fight podcast. I think you guys would absolutely get a kick out of what he's saying, especially if you enjoy the message of this show. And it highlights a growing sentiment. And again, I wish I could have spoken to him for 2 hours, because I would love to get into how this was Bernie Sanders' message in the primaries in 2016. And Hillary Clinton very famously announced that breaking up banks that had grown to be too big wouldn't fix racism. And it was met with a rousing cheer, because that's the way that politics worked back then. You now have Democrats like Ruben Gallego going out and saying the next president needs to break up all of the corrupt mergers to teach these oligarchs and their investors the consequences of corruption. Now, I have the worst kind of feeling that the Democratic Party is going to focus specifically on mergers that were okayed during Donald Trump and not other mergers. And again, I would be remiss if I did not highlight that it is absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the 100% best part of the Biden administration was his antitrust department. It was Alvaro Bedoya, it was Lena Khan, it was the people that we didn't hear from as much, like Max Miller, in that administration doing the things that were necessary. They were trying to undo 40 years worth of consolidation in 4 years. And in this talk show host's humble opinion, they did a hell of a job. But Democrats can't just focus, like, for sake of argument. David Ellison is on everybody's mind right now. He's the CEO of Paramount. There's a lot of speculation as to the Colbert story that I covered yesterday, and a lot of the reason why CBS capitulated is because they're trying to get favorable rulings from Trump's FTC. And if I know anything about Trump, that is an absolutely true statement. He is a very, very, very corrupt president. Right now, the CEO of Paramount told Donald Trump he'd make sweeping changes. That is a direct quote. If he'd support Paramount's hostile takeover of Netflix, then he just refused to talk about it under oath. It's almost like it's happening right in front of our face. And again, with so many other issues impacting us on a daily basis that are a little more obvious than the corporate consolidation. Not if you listen to this show. I've been beating this drum for 3.5 years. But unfortunately, only like less than 1% of the American population listens to this show. I'm working on that. But right now, only less than 1% listen. So for the rest of the people, they might be focused on other things like the housing market. In 2005, houses cost $184,000 and the median salary was $46,000. Now the median price of a home is $450,000 and the median salary has gone up to $59,000, a $13,000 increase. It's a 150% increase versus a 28% increase. Those numbers are in your face every day, and you might not necessarily be caring about data centers or corporate consolidation or eminent domain when you can't get into a home. 36.6% of people that are 25 and older with college degrees currently do not have an occupation with the degree that they hold. Those numbers are staggering. That is more than 1 in 3. If you are a 27-year-old working in some kind of, whether it be a barista position, a manual labor position, or maybe like me, you graduate pre-med and then you decide a different route and you find yourself in a sales position. Whatever the situation may be, you're living that life. You can't afford a home, and then you're listening to a guy talk to you and say, hey, in 5 years, you might be living in a consolidated surveillance state with no way of escaping it, where, as one caller highlighted, you don't even need police officers anymore because every action you're doing is being recorded all the time. It's kind of hard to think in those grandiose ways, in those large picture ways, when you're putting groceries and gas on credit cards, right? And so it kind of shows you, and it leads back all into that pretentious idea I always jump into, referred to as intersectionality, where all of society's problems are tied into one another. And when you look at it from that perspective, a lot of the decisions that our politicians make start to make sense outside of the obvious millions of dollars of cash getting funneled into their bank accounts to do unpopular things. But again, that is just another drop in the bucket that add to this inevitable outcome. It's very weird stuff. Very weird time to be alive. I'm sure they say that every generation, but these technological advances truly are unparalleled. And I grew up during, the biggest jump in technological advances to date, right? Like, millennials are the generation that it feels like every 2 years there's a new version of technology that you need to be able to learn and adapt to be able to use. That's why I oftentimes joke that millennials are the new greatest generation, because we played outside. We were forced to learn social skills. We know how to hold a conversation. If you haven't noticed, I talk pretty well. But at the same time, we had to learn how to integrate great technology. We were up to date more often than not with most of the new types of technology that were out there, whether it be for social reasons or professional reasons. I can tell you right now, the previous radio station that I worked at, everybody on the air minus one person was in their 60s. Everybody on the air. The joke I would always tell was, if the on-air host had a heart attack on the air, I could turn my microphone on as a producer and start talking. If I had a heart attack while the producer was on the air, that he would have to talk for the next 3 hours because he was not going to know how to be able to use the technology that we were able to use. And you know what? Then I came to Appleton, and the technology is totally different than what I was using in Pittsburgh. And you had to learn that. You have to learn how to use 57 different social media networks. We watched all this happen, and I'm telling you from firsthand experience, what we are seeing develop next is unparalleled to anything that I have seen. And I even told you, as much as I rail against AI, if you don't follow me on any of my socials, first of all, do it at Ben Cominos. But I have been posting videos that have captions where the camera angles change, where all these cool things happen. That is AI pulling a clip from the video that I'm creating for YouTube and just giving it to me to post to social media. It takes no time. That's a producer's job, is to go and find those things. Now, I don't have a producer, so for me, it was a useful tool to be able to add a little bit to what's going on with this job. But if you work at a station, whether it's TV, radio, or independent media through the internet, these are the kind of advancements that you need to be aware of, because this is probably going to come for you in years. Because, to be perfectly frank, it generates 5 clips, 3 or 4 of them are typically trash, but one of them's pretty usable every single day. And that's only going to get better with time. Now, that's not as scary as the surveillance part of it, but if someone who is very aware of all of the drawbacks of AI, and I have gone out of my way to not become dependent. I have never used it for content creation, and I never will, because I don't want it to know how I think. But the fact is, it is useful to everybody in some ways, and it is a matter of balancing its useful properties with a job market and making sure that we just don't become another multicultural version of China, which I would hope most people don't want to do. We have a call waiting to chime in. Anybody else wants to jump on? 920-281-1150. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Hey, Ben, Cynthia from Florida. I don't know if you have talked about AI agents hiring humans. They have a site called Meetscape. I don't know if you read that or not.
I have not.
They're hiring humans to do things they can't do because they have no body.
Oh, wow. That's so crazy.
I mean, this stuff is terrifying to me. But I grew up watching the Twilight Zone. So, Mr. Finchley, I never wanted a smart house.
Oh, right. Exactly. And see, growing up reading sci-fi and enjoying like the Terminator movies, what scares me, Cynthia, is the idea of what's called the singularity. And we're essentially there. The whole idea is eventually artificial intelligence will become so smart that it will be able to build better versions of itself without human interaction. And the second it can build something smarter than that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. This is what movies have warned us about for decades. And we're living it right now. It's crazy. Yeah, you know what, Cynthia? We're losing your connection there. I apologize. I'm sure you had a good point, but we're struggling to hear you right now. But that's a very real issue that not social media, movies have been warning about. The Terminator movies, hell, Age of Ultron, the Avengers movie. Ultron is building stronger versions of himself shortly after he's created. That's why the problem even exists, is because now no one knows how he's able to do that. And our AI applications are doing it right now. Right now, we are living in that reality, and it's only going to get more extreme. And again, I don't want to be rude, because I know that I have people in my audience that are either of retirement age or are approaching it, who are engineers and IT people and tech people and are up to date on the most new technologies that are out there. I am speaking in broad terms, and I do recognize that. But I'm saying per capita, the age of a person does matter in terms of being able to successfully use technology. The number of times I have had to talk my dad through Hulu problems from 5 states over is a large number, and it's not going to stop happening. It's only going to happen more prevalently as time goes on, right? So everybody's experience is different, but with our current Congress, with the geriatric army that is the American Congress, that needs their staff, that's probably getting paid $34,000 a year to keep these people afloat, with their staff needing to be the ones that do their social media, that show them how to use smartphones, it does not elicit the greatest sense of hope that we have the people elected right now to do the right thing, or to even know what the right thing to do is. Then you add on top of that, Zuckerberg was just on trial yesterday for children and the addictive nature of social media, which is something that I think has always been on our radar. But I also am nervous anytime Congress say they're doing something in the name of defending children, because I always use the example, it's like when Roger Goodell says he's doing something in the name of player safety. That's always the last reason why he's actually doing something. And there's something else nefarious happening behind the scenes there. Zuckerberg was just on the stand talking about these kind of things, and it's no coincidence the same freaking day, it is announced that Meta has created 2 super PACs, dumping $65 million, which, to be perfectly honest, isn't even that much money. I hate to be that guy. It's like we're being sold out for not nearly enough money. $65 million into 2 separate super PACs, ready to donate to anybody that's willing to say, let's not regulate AI and make sure we get this off the ground as fast as possible. In favor of the masked Virgin Army? Who cares? Go ahead and take our money as long as you vote for AI. In favor of no longer sending money to Israel? Fantastic. As long as you're willing to funnel money into our AI projects as multi-billion-dollar corporations already, that's all I care about. Don't regulate us. You're watching this stuff happen in front of your face. It's not the main story of the day because, again, I am an hour and 20 minutes into the proper show of Outside the Box at this point, not including the local half hour. And I've barely even mentioned that a member of royalty was arrested because of Epstein affiliation. And I understand why that is such a major story and that needs to be taken seriously. And I don't want to sound defeatist, but I also don't trust that the people in America in charge are going to hold anybody to account as a result of the Epstein files. So now we have a daily story that is on everybody's mind, taking the place of ICE, taking the place of AI, taking the place of consolidation, taking the place of money in politics, that isn't actually going to go anywhere. It's the Trump trials all over again. Don't talk about the fledgling economy. Don't talk about how anybody under 45 doesn't see a path forward in this nation. Don't talk about how AI is probably going to take a lot of those jobs that the people under 45 are going to need in order to build that future, to get the home that they're never going to be able to afford. We're not talking about any of that. These are the conversations that need to happen. And 1 2-hour local radio show can only do so much, but it's a matter of getting the story out there. And I love that people like Max Miller exist and are doing the right things and are trying their best to get that message out there and let people know that we are not defeated. Eminent domain is not a guarantee to work. We don't have to elect people that are in favor of these policies. It's a matter of knowing that it's happening and doing the right thing. So with all of that, we're going to go to break. We are going to switch gears into some of the major headlines of the day, but I feel like we have talked this to death at this point, unless anybody else wants to chime in. And now that I think about it, I did see Joe had emailed before I go to break. One of the top 3 auto producers has taken $27.2 billion loss because their electric vehicles did not pan out. And I heard that on the Car Doctor, and he is not agreeable with the EV movement because we're going too fast. And I feel like that fits in with your topic. Here's the thing, Joe. In my humble opinion, I think it's the exact opposite of the topic. We should have been investing in electric vehicles 20 years ago. The problem with electric vehicles now is that, and we are getting close. I don't want to report on it yet because I don't have any verified factual information. But it does seem like we are getting closer to allow BYD vehicles in America. Those are the Chinese electric vehicles that are getting sold at obscenely cheap rates. In every other nation, in America is not allowing them to be sold in America, not because they don't work, not because they're not cheap. It's because we cannot compete with their capacity to bang those cars out. And the reason they can bang those cars out is twofold. A, they don't pay a lot of their citizens enough money to do jobs in China. They provide standards of living in other ways, of course, but the salaries aren't nearly as high as what they are here. But 2, it's because China's been working on this for over 20 years. Meanwhile, in America, and I was around for it, I was in high school. You would tell high school kids about climate change and pollution and blah, blah, blah. And you know what the adults who disagreed with it would tell you? Probably a lot of you already are saying the answer before I even say it. Oh, well, China and India don't care about pollution and electric vehicles, and they're generating so much more waste, so who cares? It turns out that was a bunch of made-up BS, and China can't say as much for India, although they're improving in a lot of ways as well. But China's just much more on our radar these days. They were investing in it for decades, and now they kind of have the market cornered, and American companies are trying to keep up with what's happening. They're trying to play catch-up. The best example I can use, and I know this is going to be scoffed at by some people, is that Marvel started their connected universe in 2008. I'm actually going to do this right now because this fits in perfectly. These 2 movies both came out in the summer of 2008. The first Iron Man movie and The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger as the Joker. 2 seminal comic book movies that I would say started a 20-year fad in Hollywood. Marvel decided, let's start working now on telling a cohesive story spanning 25 movies that is all going to culminate in this fantastic conclusion in 2019. Now, granted, they've gone on for 7 years after the fact, probably should have ended in 2019, and tell this great story that has finality and themes and motifs. And to me, it is one of the greatest achievements in cinema is that they were able to take a movie with a 72-person cast billing and make it make sense for people that were following along. DC Comics, their competitors, had the Dark Knight series, which was a phenomenal series. And after the third movie in 2012, they decided, okay, we're done with that. Let's now start our own thing 4 years after Marvel did it. Let's not plan it out and throw a bunch of crap at the wall and see how the people react to it. One of those companies was generating $1 billion with every movie that came out. And then one of those companies was generating a decent amount of money still, not nearly as much as the other one, and was also critically panned with every effort that they made because they were rushing. The reason why car companies today feel like the EV idea is not functional for them is because they're trying to be DC Comics in a world where Marvel has been building this universe out for 2 decades. It's the best analogy that I can make. Not impossible. DC's starting over again. And you know what? That first Superman movie was pretty okay. I enjoyed it. Maybe they're building something good. We'll see what happens. But you need to put the time in. You need to invest. You need to strategize. And when half of the political aisle has been dedicated to stopping any kind of development in the electric vehicle space for 2 decades, that makes it a lot more difficult to keep up now. So those individuals, and you know who I'm talking to, MAGA, those individuals need to get to shutting the hell up, and we need to start progressing forward with this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it's going to take time. It's going to take more than one presidency to get there. Do the American people have that kind of patience? And will they have that kind of patience when they see just how affordable the existing competition is relative to what we are able to buy right now? You guys know what a Toyota, I don't know if it's pronounced Hilux or Helix, it's Hilux. It's like a very tiny truck that you're not allowed to sell in America that's electric. Instead, we sell big honking 4x4s that cost infinity dollars to buy. You can buy a Hilux for like, I don't know what the number is. I'm not going to make them up. They were all over Thailand, Bangkok specifically. I even looked at them, like, look at the size of that truck. And my buddy who travels all over says, oh, yeah, those are quite literally everywhere else other than America because you're not allowed to buy them there. So that's my long way of answering your question, Joe, is I don't think it's apples to apples. Jerry says the last time a British royal was arrested is during the 1600s. I don't mean to minimize that it's happening, Jerry. I don't mean to minimize it at all. I'm just kind of providing some context as for why, in my opinion, I think this story that is going to hit a lot harder than an elite being arrested, which should happen. But again, it's not going to happen here. But what about Bill Clinton? What about Donald Trump? And then we all just kind of sit on our hands. What about the Dow? It's 50 thou. Remarkable time to be alive, to say the very least. All right, we're going to go to break, switching topics on the other side, unless, of course, you guys want to keep it rolling. 920-281-1150. We'll be back outside the box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY and Political Voices Network. I'm pretty sure I could do an entire PhD class on how the whole Marvel DC thing relates to business in general and how one decision can set up two companies on two entirely different trajectories for decades as a result of just one minute decision. I'm telling you, I realize they're kind of old hat at this point, but the casting of Robert Downey Jr. will go down as one of the most consequential hirings in all of Hollywood history. Some of you may scoff at that statement, but I don't even need to let the rest of my life play out to know that that's an accurate statement. So take it how you want it. I talk about this all. If you know me personally, It's not the first time you've heard me go on that DC Marvel rant and compare that to a number of other companies, because the principles of that lesson can truly be applied to so many other conversations, and the electric vehicle and renewable energy in general conversation, I think, should be one of them. Okay, so with that, I do want to get into the MAGA movement a little bit here. MAGA, of course, being Make America Healthy Again. RFK Jr. says some pretty stupid stuff. I think we can all agree on that, right? Right? We're all on the same page that he says some pretty dumb stuff. He very famously went viral this week alone. Forget about the whole like killing the bear thing or the brainworm stuff or any of that. At one point, he either earlier this week or the end of last week, he went viral for saying that germs do not scare him because he used to do cocaine off of toilet seats, which, like, far be it for me to judge what anybody does in their personal lives, but if you're going to do cocaine in the bathroom, why wouldn't you do it off the back of the toilet? Like, the fact that you're doing it off the toilet seat, I don't care about your thoughts on germs. It just tells me you're stupid. And you're not supposed to call people stupid, but I'm just saying, you tell me what that means then otherwise. But his popularity took off as a result of this MAGA movement. There's a video out right now of him and Kid Rock working out together in like tight jeans. For those of you that are Arrested Development fans, there's a spoof video out there with Tobias from Arrested Development, who very famously is a never nude and is always in tight jean shorts and talks about how he is never completely naked. And they're playing it at the same time as the RFK Kid Rock video that's out there. And everyone's having fun with it, so on and so forth. It absolutely caught my attention, that's for sure. I'm not intending to do an entire segment about it, but it does need to exist. I do need to say something about it. But in a much less fun way, we do need to talk about MAGA. Now, I've already gone over in extensive detail, but for those of you new to the audience with the Political Voices Network, MAGA is essentially the entirety of Michelle Obama's efforts in the White House while Barack Obama was in office. And I remember very vividly a bunch of Republicans standing up and saying, these liberals aren't going to tell me. Family would oftentimes take that attitude. CNN actually played a montage of it. So just to kind of back up the point that I'm making, listen to this really quickly, and then I'll get to the main crux of the point.
Why would you want to raise your own kids?
You're right.
When Michelle Obama will do it for you?
You're right.
And in fact, she'll do it at gunpoint. In fact, you don't really have a choice.
When I heard this, I thought, get your damn hands off my fries, lady. If I want to be a fatty and shovel French fries all day long, that is my choice.
I want the nanny state out of my life. I don't want my body commandeered. And I will tell you that the most sovereign thing you have is your soul.
Okay, so that sums up right there exactly how people feel about it. And for the record, you're allowed to feel that way about it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying I'm willing to bet a lot of people who felt that way during the Obama era are also now big-time RFK fans. And knowing that is where the lack of consistency comes from here. And that's a very frustrating reality that a lot of people, I think, need to recognize if you want to be taken seriously. Now, that is also not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is the fundamental decisions being made by HHS, by this administration, leave a lot to be desired. As somebody who does think we need to be raised healthier, as someone who was raised on sugary drinks, remember Huggies? You guys, I think they're still a thing. They were just like basically sugar. They were different colors of sugar in water, and you could get them for literally 2 cents a pop, and they would come in a pack of 48. So for 96 cents, you could get 48 drinks, and your kids would shut up and they'd love them. I used to drink Huggies all the time as a kid. Drank pop all the time. The candy was out there, all this stuff. And I only as an adult decided that I need to make better decisions for what I'm putting in my body on a day-to-day basis. I do better. I have plenty of room to grow still. But it's been a personal process of mine, and I do think that we could use a little bit of regulation on what is being sold in our grocery stores, what companies are allowed to put in food in order to be able to mass produce it, to make it cheaper, to make it more available, so on and so forth. I think this is a valid concern to address. The MAGA movement in the current iteration of the Farm Bill, it was released just yesterday. It contains a provision, and it is designed to give pesticide manufacturers immunity. It's in section 10205 of the current iteration of the Farm Bill that came out yesterday, specifically addressing pesticide immunity. The lawyers behind the provisions drafted the language in a manner which obfuscates. I could read it to you. It will not make any sense to anybody. I had to go find generic speak on the internet in order to be able to put this in real life terms. Legislators are being told it's a provision for uniform labeling for pesticides, but pesticides already have uniform labeling. It is about immunity for the cancers that are caused by these pesticides that are currently being passed by a Republican Senate, a Republican House, a Republican president, with an individual who is willing to stake his reputation to these kind of things. And RFK Jr. is a healthy son of a gun. You look at those pictures, the videos of him, dude's jacked for his age. I'm jealous. Like, I'll be the first one to say it. I'm jealous for the way that he's been able to maintain himself. He's got great self-discipline. And I do believe that he means a lot of the stuff that he says. I think he's a little out there, but I think he means it. And for this kind of stuff to be working its way through the pipeline, and it's going to pass because, of course, anybody that doesn't vote for the Farm Bill, because this is in there, is going to be labeled as some kind of anti-farm person, right? We know how politics works at this point. It's the same way that the SAVE Act really doesn't have anything to do with voter ID. And that's what every single Republican is labeling every Democrat as. And unless you listen to this show or a handful of others, you really do, excuse me, you really don't hear that out there coming out of politicians' mouths. And I think it's unfortunate that the people are willing to hide what's happening in this conversation here. I would hope that the people who voted about MAGA, who were in favor of what that was, are willing to be consistent and demand that these things be taken out of this bill, because again, we can only do so much as individuals. Going to eat fruits and vegetables, which on paper should be a positive. Like 40% of my diet is fruit. But when you find out the stuff that it's sprayed with, am I essentially poisoning myself? These are the kind of conversations that we need to be able to get to the bottom of. And again, this is a big ag problem. This is not a small, I'm not saying all mom and pop farm operations have their hands clean, but the reason this is in the legislation is for the ease of the largest operations to be able to continue to move at the same point. Tom in Green Bay simply just says steroids. I need you to elaborate a little bit more on that. But I'm assuming that's what you're saying is getting pumped into them as well. Ben says that addicts participating in addict behavior make stupid decisions. At least he's honest about it. Talking about RFK and the coke. And again, I am not knocking him for a second, because you're exactly right, Ben. He was an addict. I said, far be it for me to judge people's drug behaviors. And I'm not going to get into that. Let's just say people in glass houses. But I was having a little bit of fun with the comment, and I do get it. I should have been more sympathetic to the addict perspective, and I appreciate you keeping me honest with that. So thank you for that statement there. Oh, Tom, you're saying RFK is on steroids. Got it. Okay. I don't know if that's true or not, but again, dude's yoked. That's absolutely true. DSL says EV has always been a joke because you need electricity to power it, which mainly comes from fossil fuels. but also considering they have the technology to run vehicles with water or hydrogen. The guy who invented it was disappeared and the patent was hidden. Big business and government actively work against humanity. That was, I don't know if you listened to the first hour, DSL, but that was kind of the entire conversation that we had during the first hour, is that the wealthiest individuals have gone from being labeled as people who aren't helping to being labeled as people that are actively hurting. I had an example of it earlier in the week, and now I'm blanking on what it was, but we talked about exactly that better versions of things are being withheld because, it was renewable energy. There's evidence that there are articles out there with high-ranking officials within American energy companies essentially stating that we do not generate renewable energy in this country, or if we bought the products from China, it would be impossible to actually make a profit on it because the energy can be generated so cheaply. So it's an example of our economic system preventing the exact kind of developments that it allegedly is supposed to encourage. And that is not the only example of that kind of things. Kristen says we just have to get expensive gym memberships and do a cold plunge, and then we naturally get immunity to measles. Look, I'm not saying everything out of RFK Jr.'s mouth makes sense, but I do get your point nevertheless. But I'm saying if there genuinely is a MAGA movement, and I have what are known as crunchy individuals in my life who do buy into a lot of this, and I myself believe that a lot of the stuff funneled into our foods keeps us fat, keeps us unhealthy. If you actually buy into that, then the people who are running on it need to be held to account. I don't want to be rude. Not a whole lot of fat people in Thailand. I can tell you that much. You know what I ate in Thailand basically every single day? Stir fry. Veggies, fruits, chicken, and some kind of sauce that I could have done without. But nevertheless, food for thought. I have to cram one more quick break in here before we do a final segment. So any of your final thoughts, and we'll put a bow on this conversation. Everybody stay where you are, outside the box. Ben Cominos, WHBY, Political Voices Network. All right, we got a little bit of time left before we call it a show here, about 5-ish minutes. I had a plan, but I already forgot what it was because I got a text from Kristen during the break, and what she said was more important than whatever I was working through. We just wrapped up a conversation about MAGA, or at least I thought that I had wrapped it up, but she made a point that I wanted to kind of get into here because I kind of ended the segment saying that people were much healthier per capita in Thailand than they are in America. It stuck out to me right around day 4 or 5, where I kind of looked at my friend who I was fortunate enough that I grew up in a neighborhood where all of us were in shape in our teens, and none of us really lost that. It's not that it's not like I'm the epitome of health, but at the same time, I'm very conscious of it, as are all the people that I grew up with, and we're all still very close. So we kind of appreciate that about one another. And Kristen highlighted something, though, that I think is worth pointing out to wrap this show up. To comment on what I said about the healthier nature of people in Thailand and the fact that the food is just encourages a healthier lifestyle, she retorted with, what do they have in other countries that make them healthier? It's not just the food that they eat. It's infrastructure that supports walking everywhere, universal health care or some form of it, access to affordability to fresh fruit and vegetables. It's not the dyes or the vaccines. The real food, she puts in quotes, piece of MAGA is elitist and does nothing to improve public health. HHS is for public health. She went on to say, and the weather is way nicer, which makes walking so much more enjoyable, which absolutely helps as well. But she does bring up a great point, and it's an element of my Thailand trip that I really didn't get into the week that I got back. And that was how excited I was about walkable cities. I started in Bangkok, which is very bustling, and I did walk quite a bit still, but you kind of take your life into your own hands, crossing streets there and whatnot. But with every island that I visited, whether it was Koh Samui or Koh Tao or Koh Phangan, each one of them got smaller and smaller, more quaint and more quaint, and as a result, much more walkable than the previous place that I was visiting. And I couldn't stop talking about how much I liked it. And what's funny is the only time realistically, not the only, but for most of us, the only time people live in a truly walkable environment is if they live on campus during college. And I think there's a reason why so many people have such fond memories of college. Of course, outside of the lack of responsibility and the young, attractive people everywhere and all that kind of jazz. I think it is the walkable nature of those societies. I stayed in hostels everywhere I went, and the route that we took, Bangkok to Samoy to Pyongyang to Tao, it's a common track for a lot of people to follow. So even though I wasn't staying in the same hostels as the same people that I met, you'd go from one place to another, you'd be walking, you'd be heading to a bar, you'd be heading to a restaurant, and you'd bump into somebody that you were staying at the previous hostel at completely out of nowhere. You'd get excited, then you guys go somewhere. We walked everywhere. My legs were so sore the first week that I was there because I walk quite a bit in my everyday life. Nothing compared to what it was like there. So I do think that's a great point from Kristen as well. And unfortunately, the way our infrastructure is set up in this nation, I don't know how you reverse course. I don't know how you make walkable cities in Northeast Wisconsin. And it's unfortunate because I do think you're right. And that is absolutely a component of it as well that I think needs to be acknowledged when we're talking about health. And of course, the pesticides that are being sprayed that companies now no longer need to worry about being sued over, given what's in the Farm Bill if it passes. More on that another time because unfortunately we are out of it. Haley's up next. She's got the Social Security Hour coming up. And of course, we've still got one more show before I am legally allowed to call it a week. So make sure you tune in there and catch the video of this show on Political Voices Network at 1 o'clock today. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. This is Outside the Box.